U.S. President Donald Trump says he will now impose a 50% tariff on copper imports. He made the declaration at a cabinet meeting in Washington, but it's unclear exactly when the new tariff will take effect. Trump also says he will soon announce tariffs on pharmaceutical imports.
President Donald Trump dropped a bombshell at a recent Washington cabinet meeting, announcing a 50% tariff on copper imports, though he didn't pin down exactly when it'll kick in. This isn't just another trade policy tweak, it's a seismic shift that's already cost the U.S. economy $4.2 billion in less than a day. Copper prices on the COMEX exchange skyrocketed 13% overnight, hitting a record $5.95 per pound. Canada, which supplies over 40% of America's refined copper, didn't waste a second striking back. Major miners like Teck Resources and Hudbay Minerals froze all export contracts to the U.S., and Ottawa issued a blunt statement. They're done relying on a trade partner that changes the rules on a whim. The fallout? A supply chain crisis ripping through U.S. electronics, construction, and automotive industries, the likes of which we haven't seen since wartime shortages. Copper, the metal powering everything from circuit boards to car motors, is now at the heart of a new trade war, and American consumers are already feeling the squeeze in their wallets. From skyrocketing car prices to pricier light bulbs, this tariff is hitting home. So, what happens when a policy meant to protect pushes America's manufacturing to the edge? Stick with us to unpack this, and if you want to stay in the loop, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. The moment Trump invoked Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, labeling copper a national security priority, the 50% tariff was locked in for August 1, 2025. This wasn't a small adjustment, it was a gut punch to a critical piece of America's industrial backbone. Copper prices on CME futures contracts spiked 13% in a single day, climbing to between $5.64 and $5.69 per pound. Meanwhile, the London Metal Exchange saw prices dip slightly as global markets braced for a drop in U.S. demand. This created a massive price gap. U.S. copper now costs up to 25% more than the global benchmark, opening the door to a chaotic arbitrage market that exposes the flaws in this protectionist gamble. Canada's response was swift and surgical. Ottawa declared it would pivot away from the U.S., seeking new trade partners in Asia and Europe to reduce its reliance on an unpredictable neighbor. In 2023, over half of Canada's copper exports went to the U.S., so this wasn't just a symbolic move, it was a strategic middle finger. Mining giants like Glencore in Quebec are already rerouting their supply chains, and financial analysts warn that if this price gap holds, the U.S. risks economic isolation reminiscent of the 1930s, when protectionist policies under Hoover triggered a global trade freeze. The ripple effects are already clear. Higher costs for cars, energy, and telecom, with inflation looming and production stalling as supply chains choke. The U.S. produces just over half its copper needs and imported 810,000 tons in 2024, mostly from Canada, Chile, Peru, and Mexico. With domestic refining capacity, like Arizona's ASARCO plant shuttered or limited, this tariff doesn't solve supply issues. It just jacks up prices and leaves industries scrambling. Canada didn't just sit back and take the hit. They came out swinging. With $9.3 billion in annual copper exports, most of which used to flow south, Canada holds serious leverage. Within days of Trump's tariff announcement, companies like Teck Resources and Hudbay Minerals, alongside others like Glencore, halted U.S. shipments and started redirecting raw copper to Japan, South Korea, and China for refining. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. It was a calculated pivot.
The company says it lost $1.1 billion from its bottom line this past quarter. And this comes as the latest CBS News polls show 60% of Americans oppose new U.S. tariffs, and 61% think the Trump administration is focusing on them too much.
Ottawa backed it up with a $1.8 billion CAD investment to expand copper export infrastructure beyond North America, signaling a bold ambition to reshape Canada's role in the global metals market. This isn't just about redirecting trade routes. It's about Canada rewriting the rules to sidestep U.S. unpredictability. By shifting raw copper to Asian refineries, Canada's cutting the U.S. out of its supply chain entirely. If this plan holds, Canada's exports to Asia could surge, while the U.S.'s share of Canadian copper could plummet. The fallout for America is stark. Refineries will starve for raw material, production costs will spike, and consumers will foot the bill for everything from electric vehicles to power lines. Canada's not just a supplier anymore, it's a strategic rival, steering the global copper trade in a way that leaves the U.S. on the sidelines, grasping for a self-reliance it can't yet achieve. This tariff isn't just shaking up trade, it's throwing American businesses into chaos and hitting consumers where it hurts most. Every electric vehicle needs about 80 kilos of copper for wiring, motors, and circuits. With prices surging, analysts estimate production costs for each EV have jumped by roughly $90. That's not just a number, it's a death knell for companies like Tesla and Ford, who are reportedly bleeding millions monthly as EV projects stall due to copper shortages. Small manufacturers in states like Ohio and Indiana, who rely on copper for wiring and electronics, are getting crushed. Imported copper wire prices are up 18%, forcing these businesses to lose contracts to competitors in Vietnam and Thailand, where copper costs are stable. Utility companies are in a bind too, with copper-based conductors and transformer cores now 20–25% pricier, prompting emergency requests for electricity rate hikes. UBS projects this quarter's U.S. GDP could shrink by 0.5 points, with $4.2 billion in direct losses tied to Canada's export freeze. That's not just a statistic, it's a warning of broader economic pain. Construction companies are grappling with soaring insulation material costs, the EV sector's slowing as supply chains buckle, and energy firms are passing costs straight to consumers. Higher utility bills, pricier home repairs, and inflated construction costs are already hitting everyday Americans, all because of a tariff that's tightening the screws on an already strained market. The disruption doesn't stop there. GM and other automakers are reporting shrinking profits, with GM alone taking a $1.1 billion hit from earlier tariffs and now bracing for more pain from copper costs. Telecom equipment makers, renewable energy firms, and electronics producers are slashing margins, delaying investments, and facing potential layoffs if this drags on. The U.S. imported 53% of its copper in 2024, mostly from Chile and Canada, but its domestic refining capacity covers just 5% of demand. This tariff doesn't close that gap. It makes the market tighter, pricier, and wildly unstable. Businesses are burning through legacy copper inventories to keep costs down. But when those run dry, the real pain kicks in. Analysts warn that once stockpiles are gone, companies won't be able to absorb the costs, and consumers will see those price hikes in everything from utility bills to new cars. What started as a policy targeting a single metal is now rippling across energy, telecom, automotive, and construction sectors, turning a trade spat into a full-blown economic crisis. Canada's pivot is a masterclass in strategic retaliation. By redirecting $9.3 billion in copper exports to Asia, they've not only cut off a key U.S. supply, but also positioned themselves as a global player. It's a declaration that Canada's done being America's resource backyard. This shift is already reshaping global trade flows, with Asian refineries gearing up to process Canadian copper while U.S. plants scramble. The U.S., banking on tariffs to boost self-reliance, is instead facing a supply chain nightmare. Domestic refineries can't scale up fast enough, and with Canada's exports now heading elsewhere, American industries are left high and dry. Electric vehicle prices are spiking by $3,000 to $6,000 per car, and home construction costs could climb by $17,000 to $22,000, all tied to copper's soaring price tag. From light bulbs to EV charging stations, copper's fingerprints are on every corner of American life, and this tariff is making it all more expensive. This isn't just about copper anymore. It's about a fracturing economic order. The U.S., once the hub of North American trade, is losing its grip as Canada carves out a new role on the global stage. The tariff was sold as a way to protect American industry, but it's backfiring, driving up costs and pushing allies away. Consumers are already seeing the fallout in higher bills and pricier goods, and businesses are staring down a future of stalled projects and shrinking profits. Is this the great deal Trump promised, or a self-inflicted wound that's isolating America from the global trade network? The $4.2 billion hit is just the start, and the real costs, economic, political, and strategic, are still piling up. What do you think? Is this tariff a bold move to rebuild American industry, or the spark of a broader economic unraveling? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to stay on top of these game-changing shifts in global trade.